in Sloths and Olivia 2008. Great to see you both here. Anyone else here want to say hello? Give me a little wave. That'd be grand. I say wave as if I can actually see you. I wonder if there is like a wave emoji that you can do. Let's have a look at what's available. Well, there's all sorts of really cool little emojis. I'm going to do... Oh, no. Okay, there's a sword. Oh, that's really cool. I wonder if I type in wave, is there going to come up? Oh, there's no wave one. What might be the closest thing to a wave? I'm going to do one of these because it looks quite cool. Well, does that work? Hey, nice! There's some really cool little emojis that you can use. That's really fun. I use the Kappa one. I hope we're doing really well. I'm quite excited for this live stream today because it's on one of my favourite topics of psychology and addiction. When I was at university, I studied psychology, and one of the modules that I studied was the addiction psychology module. The lecturer for it was called Mark Griffiths, who's actually going to come up today, and he taught me a lot. Yeah, he's one of the leading addiction psychologists in Europe, which he liked to tell us quite often. But to begin with, I thought I'd ask the question, what does it mean to be addicted to something? What does it mean to be addicted to something? Can you all just write in the chat, what does it mean to be addicted to something? You know, if you are addicted to something, what does that mean? Like, how can you tell if someone is addicted to something or not? Great to see Xenon994. Great to see the Pumpkin Master. Wicked, Pumpkin Master. So the idea, Maddie Hay, you can't function without it. Can't function without. Lovely idea there. So you've got, you know, we have this substance or this activity, and if you weren't to do it, somehow you can't function, your life stops working properly. Can you be addicted to a person? A really cool idea. Can you be addicted to a person? Later on in this lesson today, we're going to be looking at that actually a little bit on what types of addiction there are, and whether something is actually addiction or simply what's known as a healthy obsession. Some kind of withdrawal without the thing. Brilliant word. Got the idea of withdrawal. Right, would you like to explain a bit what withdrawal means, the Pumpkin Master? Olivia 2008, your body has become so used to it that it needs it, not want, need. Great use of capitalization there. So much that it can't function without it. Brilliant. So there's that. What you're talking about here is something called dependency. Ooh, dependency. Right, dependency. So we've got this idea that you're depending on this thing. Can you be addicted to anything, says Mears91. Now, interestingly, no, it's not possible to be addicted to literally everything, because not everything on Earth, and we'll look about this later, not everything on Earth is damaging to you if you were to do it in a kind of obsessive kind of way. You might be obsessed with something, but it's not necessarily going to harm you, and for it to become an addiction, there's a level that it needs to harm you one way or another. So we've got vendible sugar, it kind of controls you, so a kind of lack of control. God, that's really cool. You guys are smashing this today. Anyone else got any ideas of what it is to be addicted to something? So we've got this idea of withdrawal. So once you stop taking this thing or doing this thing that you're addicted to, your body starts to feel really negative. You might feel upset, and that's the idea of withdrawal. You're having these problems because you're not doing it. Can't function without it, so similar kind of idea. Your body kind of starts to break down. A dependency, so you need it to function. You need it to be happy. And a lack of control. So all of these kind of this dependency on this. I say you need it to be happy. Need for happiness. Right? Got my spellings all over the shop today. Need for happiness, fabulous. Olivia 2008, but if you have too much of anything, wouldn't it harm you? I don't know. I'm not sure. I think if you have too much of, I don't know, I can't imagine I guess too much in its sense is the whole point, is you've had too much of that thing. But is it addiction? I mean, it's a weird one, you know. Can you live healthily too much? I guess that doesn't really make sense, you know, in itself. Like, I get the idea that if you have too much of water, that can be very damaging for you. If you have too much oxygen, that can be damaging for you, even though these things are very basic things for human survival. So this is interesting. Can you be too happy? Can you have too much love in your life? Weird. Some interesting things. So let's have a look at some ideas. I love what you guys have come up with because they're really similar to what this absolute G, known as Mark Griffiths, came up with. He was my lecturer at University of Nottingham-Trent, and he came up with, in 2005, the components model of addiction. The components model of addiction. And that included 6 things. 1, conflict. And this is kind of the big thing that differentiates between just fun things that you're obsessed with versus something that's considered an addiction, where it has to have a negative impact on your life. Maybe that's a social negative impact or a financial negative impact or other ideas there. So socially, maybe the thing that you're addicted to is causing you to lose friends, lose connection with family. Maybe the thing that you're addicted to is causing you to spend so much money on that thing that you're becoming, you're not able to function, not to get food for yourself. You might need that money to live and you're spending it all, kind of thing. Olivia, 2008, you could be so happy that you'll smile loads and break your jaw. Can you break your jaw from smiling too much? I have no idea. I'm actually going to look that up later. That sounds amazing. The second idea of the components model is withdrawal. Brilliant for those that mentioned it earlier. So you have negative feelings or emotions or bodily behaviors when you're not using or doing that addictive behavior. A mood modification. So because of your addiction, your personality is changing for the negative, right? For the negative. So your personality is changing because of this addiction. Perhaps you are becoming someone who is more deceitful. Maybe you're lying more to your friends and family because you don't want them to know about the addiction that you have. Maybe you are becoming more aggressive because you're addicted to that thing or not. Hello, Rebecca Ackerman. Great to see you. We're looking at the moment, if you've just joined a bit late, at the components model. These are different things that mean within you've got this, you can become, this is addiction. If you've got conflict with the thing, so it's negative impact in your life. If you have withdrawal, so when you're not doing it, it can cause issues with your body. And if it's changing your personality, also because of something called salience, which means that you're thinking about it all the time. You're thinking about the next time you're going to do or have this thing that you're addicted to. So it's always in the forefront of your thought processes. It's that you're thinking about it. The idea of relapse relapse switch is where you may have stopped doing that thing, but then later on in life you maybe have a bit of it, or you do a bit of it, and then you go straight back in to doing it way too much, obsessively, and in a negative way that impacts your life. It's the idea that, for example, those in the world who are addicted to alcohol, for example, they may stop drinking alcohol and then years later have one drink, but then they go back into that alcohol addiction where they're having more than they should be having on a daily basis. And finally, this idea of tolerance, which is needing more of it to get the same effect. And what 1 Million Smiths has just said is amazing. It can change you mentally and physically. That's completely correct. It can change your brain chemistry, which we're going to look at later. And it can change you emotionally and how you live your life, how you interact with people. Very, very interesting. So what I want to, as a little idea for you all, is as follows. I want to see if you can tell me if the following things are an addiction or a healthy obsession. Are they an addiction or a healthy obsession? Or can they be an addiction, or will they be a healthy obsession? So here are the things that I've got here. I've got cooking, painting, gaming, social media, shopping, exercise, drugs, and music. And for you all, to start with, cooking, do you think is an addiction or a healthy obsession? If you cook, like really obsessively, is that a healthy obsession, or is that an unhealthy obsession which can lead to addiction for cooking? What do you guys think? Mears 91, healthy obsession. Rebecca Ackerman, healthy obsession. You're quite right. Check out my cray animation. It goes straight to healthy obsession. Very nice. What about painting? What do you guys think about painting for the next one down? Painting, addiction or healthy obsession? You're right, Zenon, there can be side effects, but generally speaking, cooking is considered a healthy obsession. Not necessarily the eating unhealthily, but the idea of if you are cooking, you enjoy cooking, you're into cooking, you read cooking books, you watch cooking programs, you do loads of cooking, that's probably a healthy obsession compared to addiction. Brilliant. We've got the idea that painting is also a healthy obsession. You know, you can enjoy painting and really have a great time with it, watch it, interact with it, learn about it. What do you guys think about gaming? This is an interesting one. Yes, and on 994, there are some issues regarding painting that can, you know, smelling too much of the paint can be damaging, but generally the behavior of painting is a healthy obsession. Now, this is really interesting. Now, Mears91 has said both. Vendible Sugar has said addiction. Rebecca Ackerman has said potentially addiction. 1 Million Sauce said addiction. Now, this is really... So, gaming, generally speaking, if you're doing it a huge amount, obsessively, that goes to the addiction front. And when we talk about addiction, it's because the gaming, the interaction it has with the brain, the time spent doing it, the lack of kind of physical outcome from it, can become more of an addiction. Okay, now it is a little bit of a grey area, definitely. And some people would argue, some scientists and psychologists, even Mark Griffiths himself, would argue back and forth. Generally speaking, if you're doing this thing, most people on earth, they're doing a gaming thing obsessively, it's usually considered an addiction because it's usually quite negative on you, your personality, and who you are. Obviously, if there's some people who are doing it for money, then that's okay. You know, that's part of their job. But this is people, the general population. Well, that's social media. Social media is a really interesting one, and something that a lot of people, probably on this chat and in this lesson, are going to be having a look at. Yes, exactly. Xenon994, YouTubers and gamers aren't really addicted because it's their job, they get paid good, so it's that, you know, that's their job. It's less of an obsession, more of a, you know, it's their lifestyle, it's how they're earning their money. But generally speaking, social media is one of the most recent addictions that has been placed into an incredibly important book called the DSM, or the Diagnostic Statistic Manual. And in the Diagnostic Statistics Manual, it gives you a huge list of all the psychological illnesses that people can get, and social media addiction has within the last 10 years been added to the DSM. It's pretty new, social media addiction. What do we think about shopping? Shopping's a really interesting one as well. But again, thinking about all of these things to the point of obsession, is shopping more of an addiction or a healthy obsession, do we think? Maddie Hay thinks shopping is an addiction. Well, many of the soft seems to agree. Mears91 says addiction. Let's have a look. It is addiction indeed. Mainly, as I'm sure you'll see, because of this idea of the financial negative impact, especially if you're doing it far more than you're able to actually afford. Rebecca Ackerman said it just before I was able to say it, depending on if you can afford it or not. Lovely ideas there. Again, we're talking about the general populace, and the general populace, if they were obsessively shopping, would probably gain a negative financial impact because of that. How about exercise? Obsessive exercise. 1 Million Soft says it's an addiction. What does other people think? This is a really interesting one. It can be both, says Mears91. In the middle, exercise is healthy. Rebecca Ackerman says obsession. It's an addiction, says Maddie's Head. Oh, this is so interesting. Too much can be very, very dangerous. You are absolutely right. But it is considered a healthy obsession. It is still considered a healthy obsession. While you may or may not agree with that, usually speaking, it's good for you to exercise. If you are obsessed with exercise, that can be a healthy obsession. There are aspects of being obsessed with exercise. So, for example, if you are obsessed with exercise because you have some body image issues and you might just feel that you must exercise, otherwise you won't feel good within your body, that's kind of different, but that's not necessarily about exercise being addiction, but more about the issue you might have within your own body and body space. But exercise, generally speaking, is considered a healthy obsession because it's generally okay for you. You can't, whilst exercising too much is obviously bad for you, oftentimes people's bodies and brains will tell them, I'm really tired and I can't do it today. And often that's not the biggest of issues, but generally speaking, it's a healthy obsession. Now, drugs, I love the question by Olivia 2008. What kind of drugs are we talking about? Is it just daily medicine? Now, this aspect we're talking about illegal recreational drugs, which is when you're using those drugs for your own pleasurable use. Okay, so not for medical reasons. In the same way that, you know, for gaming, There are some people who are YouTubers and they're not just doing it for their pleasure, they're using it for their money. So some people take drugs like cannabis to put, hold on. Oh, I see. So some people might take drugs and they put it online. They still get paid for it, but it can be still an addiction. Now, cannabis is a really interesting one as a drug of whether it can be addictive or not. It's quite a diverse outcome there, but generally speaking, drugs, if doing obsessively, quite straightforwardly, is of course an addiction. Okay, there are aspects of those drugs. The whole point is that you'd be taking it, and it's part of the pleasure pathway of the brain, which we're going to be talking about. And drugs definitely is an addiction. Finally, what about music? Finally, music. Music. Can you be addicted to music? Or is it just a healthy obsession? What do we think? Listening to music, interacting with music. Rebecca Ackerman says obsession. Any other results? Any other ideas? Ah, maybe you can listen to it so loud that you can damage your ears. Nice idea there. Yes, you're quite right. There can be that damage. However, if we look at all the other bits, yes, there could be conflict because you could damage your ears, but when you're not listening to music, do you get negative feelings of not using it? I guess sometimes you can. Mood modification, can you change your personality because of it? I guess there are aspects of that. Are you thinking about music all the time? Like, oh, I can't wait to listen to my next piece of music. When you're not listening to music, I'm not sure that's quite the case. Relapse, coming back to it after shopping. I think generally speaking, it doesn't fulfill all of these, and it would be considered a healthy obsession. Overall, it would be considered a healthy obsession, even though it's generally healthy and listening to it too loudly. Generally speaking, it's okay. Now, all of these ideas are the components, and you can see here that whilst it is possible to be obsessed with everything on Earth, is it possible to be addicted? Well, not necessarily. Now, this GIF is amazing, and it shows what happens in your brain when you do, or when you take, or when you act in a situation where there is pleasure, right? There's a pleasurable thing going on. So, for example, if you were to eat some Om chocolate, Nom Nom chocolate, very, very tasty. My favourite is Kinder Bueno. If you were to have an Om Nom taste of Om Nom chocolate, this is what's happening in your brain. The first thing that occurs is you've got that blue line of dopamine. Blue line of dopamine spreading out from your midbrain round to the front of your brain. And that is that beautiful feeling of pleasure, that beautiful feeling of feeling comfortable and happy and relaxed. After that, we have this wonderful pink line coming around of serotonin. Yes, dopamine is a hormone. The serotonin pathway, the serotonin is the happy hormone. So after those feelings of pleasure, you might feel feelings of happiness. And then finally, we get this idea of oxytocin. Oxytocin is an incredible hormone that gives you feelings of connectivity. Now, I actually took this image and paused it at the minute where you can see all of it. And we can really see that when you do or take a substance, so maybe you do a behavior that is addictive, then this is what's going on in your brain. You have this reward pathway occurring in the brain. That dopamine is called the reward pathway. And that's what gives you this pleasure. It's why people love the idea. If I go back, so for example, with gaming, for example, if anyone here plays any games where you have like success, so for example, if you play Call of Duty, when you take out an enemy, you get this feeling of success, this feeling of, yes, I did it. If you're someone who plays games of puzzle games, once you complete that puzzle game, you get that feeling of pleasure. That is dopamine hitting your body. And an excessive amount of that dopamine can cause very serious changes to your body. So at its core, this is what addiction is. Things, you can be addicted to things that influence the reward pathway of the brain. Things that give pleasure, right? Things that give pleasure. So anything that you do, anything that you take that gives you this form of like pleasure, that can become an unhealthy addictive obsession. Okay, now this is an incredible hormone, very, very helpful in our bodies. Dopamine. Dopamine looks a bit like this. It has the chemical formula C8H11NO2. Now, what I'm about to do is show you an image that maybe you will get a dopamine hit from. I'd be really interested to see if this image could give you a dopamine hit. I'd love to hear what you say about this. But this is the kind of image as to why one of the previous addictions is considered an addiction. It's because of this. Let's see, I'm going to bring it up in 3. Just tell me how you feel after looking at this. 3, 2, 1, bam. Tell me how you feel looking at that. I'd be really interested to hear. I'm going to write down some feelings that you might have. So you see, you're so panic, says Mears91. Very interesting. Brilliant. On edge. Wonderful. Right, good work. A bit of stress. This is fantastic. Anyone else? Anyone else got any ideas? Like needing to clear. Fabulous. Nothing. I'm not a social boy, except YouTube, and YouTube notifs are useless. Amazing. So all of these negative feelings that people are feeling are all linked to this addictive pathway, because actually those negative feelings can be based on this kind of like stress response, and that stress response is all here, right? That's all that there. Incredibly interesting. Now, all of these notifications, it's clear that many people are feeling those negativities from it, but I think this, if you had on, for example, Snapchat, oftentimes people might get this sort of buzz. That buzz that you're all feeling out, this anxiety and upset. I'm actually going to remove it if it's causing any anxiety and upset. That buzz is all based on that addictive and pleasure pathway. Yes, it might not feel pleasurable now, but it's based on that pleasure pathway. It's based on that idea that you once had pleasure for these things, but maybe it's reduced into stress. And that is where the conflict comes in. A lot of the time, people doing these drugs, doing these addictive behaviors, they're not necessarily happy about it. They're not necessarily excited and in a positive space whilst doing those things. They probably want out. Oftentimes, people who are smoking addictively, they might want to get out of that and stop doing it. And smoking ultimately gives them displeasure. Really, really interesting there. So let's have a look at this. How can addictions form? Well, as we know, there's this idea of addiction being a reward pathway of the brain, things that give pleasure. So this is a graph. I'm going to show you a general thing of what happens of the pleasure pathways of the brain when taking or doing certain addictive behaviors. So on the left, we have a mental state of contentment. If the middle here is just being like chill, right? So you're not necessarily really happy or really sad, you just chill. Up here is super, like really pleased, right? And down here is going to be really displeased, right? So we've got that kind of range going up and down. This is what happens when you may do a thing that causes pleasure for the first time, okay? Something is addictive. You do that thing, and what can happen is your level of pleasure increases. You then get to this point of peak. This is an average. It's not for every single one, but very similar to this. You get this idea of a peak, but then often, because that dopamine hit that you've had is then depleted, because you sort of used it up as such for all of this hit, you then actually come back down and go below the mental state of contentment, and then over time, you come back to normal. This position is why some people, after taking certain psychoactive drugs, or certain people, once they stop their gaming or stop their social media, that is when you can get, for example, withdrawal and sadness and other aspects which are quite negative, okay? Where you basically are trying to deal with it, but your body doesn't have enough of this hormone that's going to keep you unhappy. But let's have a look at what happens, say, the next time you were to do that thing. Next time you do that thing, you'll notice something different. Can anyone tell me, just by having a look, the next time you take or do that thing, what is the graph showing first? So this is time number 1, this is time number 2. Now again, this is very simplified, but what happens at time number 2, the second time that you do? Maddie Hayes talking about you need more and more, amazing. So this idea of tolerance, right? You get the idea that you don't get as high as you were before. Before you went all the way up to here, but the second time you're not necessarily as high as before. it's lower down, you get less happy and more displeased. I love that. So it's a generally, overall, more negative experience. Right? It's generally more negative. You get a little bit sadder. But what's happening after this, right? You may have this, you get less happy, more displeased afterwards, but then this occurs. What's that about? It seems that your average has changed. Yeah, there's a chance. This isn't all the time, but anyway. Usually, over time, if say you never take it again, it will slowly go back to where you were normally. But it seems that without it, you're then below your normal state. Now, I'm going to delete all this and show you what this looks like for someone who may be very far on and they are very addicted to something. And it can look like this, where they take the drug or do the occurrence and they use it to go back to normal, because unfortunately their average, they then go really low, their average is just so much lower. So unfortunately for some people who are addicted to things, their brain chemistry has changed so much that they need it in order to function. They need it in order to be normal. I read a very, very interesting article written by someone who was addicted to a very, very addictive drug. And they were saying that over time of using that drug, they needed it so much that they needed this drug in order to function in their job. And they needed their job to get money. And they needed that money to get this drug so that they could be in a position where they could earn money at their job so that they could spend that money. And you can just see this chaotic circle into quite a vicious space that's, excuse me, incredibly difficult to get out of. Brilliant, this vicious circle, endless circle. And unfortunately, people like that, if they're found out to be taking this illegal drug, oftentimes they might be put in jail, they might be separated from society, which can lead to quite a lot of sadness, unhappiness, and unfortunately leading to being in a position where they may need that drug in order to be happy again. And this is where we can talk about what can we do to help addictions, to help people who are addicted. How can we get them out of that vicious circle, which can take years, by the way, depending on how far into that addiction they are. What can we do? Here are 5 images, A, B, C, D, and E. I'd like you to write in the chat, A equals something, or B equals something. What do these pictures represent as to ways to help people who are addicted, or ways to prevent people from becoming addicted in the first place? What do we think? Go for it. Over to you. B is AA or something similar. Fabulous work. So maybe any kind of therapy or rehab. Don't know if that's quite as clear. So rehabilitation. E is education. Fabulous work. So education, just like you guys are doing today, but also education in schools. E is learning about it. Brilliant. Is education. A is protest. Lovely idea, but no. A isn't a protest. I don't know if you can quite read it, but A says clean needles save lives. C is support or arts and crafts. Brilliant. C is indeed support, but also community. Right? If someone is addicted to something, one of the worst things that can happen to them is that they get shunned. They get pushed away from society and put somewhere else, away from us all. They need help. They need love. They need kindness. C is friends. Brilliant. Exactly. They need love and support. A is making it safe. I love that idea. Making it safe. Now, I want to hear if you can tell me a bit more about making it safe. C, talking together, good support. A is using propaganda to tell people. Now, this isn't quite propaganda. Lovely idea. E is education. What do you think D is all about? D is distraction. Nice idea there, but no, D is not to represent distraction. So A and E. Let's have a think. Got research, incredible work, Nears 91. D is research. Research done by scientists, psychologists, psychotherapists, psychiatrists, all to work out A, what brings someone to a point where they may have an addictive personality or become addicted to things, and B, if someone is addicted to those things, how can we help them come out of it? What chemicals might we be able to give them? For example, medicinal drugs that can help them come out of it, or therapies that can help them come out of it, or a mixture of both. What can we do to help people? And research can really help with this. Now, A is one of the most interesting ones that I remember as a kid learning about and thinking, that's so weird, that's such a good idea. Clean needles save lives. What this is a van, right? This is a van where you can go, and it's called harm reduction, right? Harm reduction. The idea of clean needles save lives is you go to this van. If you're addicted to a drug that you need a syringe, a needle to inject in order to have this drug, you go into that van, you give them the needles that you've used, so they're used, you know, they've been into your body or someone else's body, and they will, for free, give you clean syringes. They'll give you clean ways to do it. Now, some people really disagree with that, as if it is giving these people a reason to do it. But I put this forward to you all as listening, as listeners. What would you rather? Someone continuing to do it with dirty needles and spreading illnesses such as HIV, which is spread a lot of the time through shared needles, or other illnesses? Or would you rather, if they were to do it, at least they're doing it in a way that's safest? And that's the idea of harm reduction. Acknowledging some people are addicted to these things. Let's make sure they do that as safely as possible, as well as giving them therapy, as well as giving them support, as well as researching the best ways to help them, and as well as educating. People who don't want to do drugs won't do them, even if you give it for free. Exactly right. You know, this isn't saying, hey guys, why doesn't everyone do this drug? This is saying, look, we're sorry that people are addicted. We understand there are loads of reasons for that, but let's help you do it in a safe way at the very least. I think this is a really beautiful idea, harm reduction. Now, the question is, how can you help? I'm going to tell you a bit of a story, and I want to end today with what can you as listeners do for each other in order to help each other with, potentially if you feel like you yourself are having any kind of things that may link to or starting a kind of addictive personality, or if you know someone in the world who's with this. And I will be letting you know of a link that you can go to help with this. Usually speaking, the best place to go if you want to look at addiction would be the NHS website. Very, very helpful for this, to help with addiction. But here's a bit of a story of what we can do to help. Now, this story is based on a video by the Kurzgesagt, which has been taken down and put back up again because of different issues, but I'm going to talk a specific aspect of this story. There was a famous experiment many, many years ago where a scientist put a rat in a cage. They put this rat in a cage and gave it 2 bottles to drink from. One bottle was water, which is on the right there, and one bottle was laced or had an amount of cocaine inside it. Okay, it had an illegal drug in it. And they watched the rat and saw what happened. Now, as you can probably imagine, the rat eventually would drink more and more of the drug-laced water, and some rats even drank it to their own demise. They ended up dying because they overdosed on this drink. From this experiment, it got published, and they concluded, right, drugs are bad, drugs leads to death, drugs leads to addiction, and it's been a major experiment in the war on drugs. But a different scientist read this, saw this article, and thought, well, okay, if you were in a cage and there was nothing to do apart from drink water or get high, like, of course you're going to do the thing that takes you away from the reality that you're in. You're going to do the thing that's exciting, that changes your personality. It's something to do. So this scientist changed the experiment and made Rat Park, named it Rat Park. In Rat Park there were things to do, there were other rats to hang out with, there were fun little things for them to hang, it was really like a fun place. And again, they gave the rats 2 drinking fountains, one that had water and one that was laced with drugs, and had them next to each other. Interestingly, in this experiment, they saw that nearly none of the rats would bother taking the drug water. Yes, they of course tried it, it was there, but they didn't really use it to the point of addiction. 0% of them overdosed to the point of death. And they took it a step further, which was they got rats that were addicted to a drug-induced water, so they got rats from the previous experiment that were addicted to this drug, put them into Rat Park and see what happens, and they slowly but surely stopped taking the addictive drug water and started to kind of come out of it. This scientist concluded that that situations are what majorly influence addiction, that someone who is addicted to something, they can stop that addiction through what we were talking about before, through support, through therapy, education, research, things that are helping them. However, that conclusion was very highly criticized by biopsychologists who say no, it can't only be about sorry, I'm going to take a step back. It was highly criticized by people, okay, this happens in rats, but this doesn't happen in humans. And it's actually, an experiment like this has actually happened in humans, although it wasn't an experiment. Many years ago, there was something called the Vietnam War, which is where America and Vietnam had quite a big war. During that time, about 20% of people, of soldiers in that war, American soldiers, became addicted, heavy users of the local drug, which was heroin. Heroin, as we I'm sure have heard, is a very addictive drug, and around 20% of all soldiers there were getting addicted to it. The American government was scared, it was terrified that all these people would come home and they would be very addicted and they would need a lot of support. But this is what they came home to. From a war-torn country of fighting and death and shooting and anger and aggression, they came home to this. A lot of people came home to a loving family, to a loving community, people who were there to support them. And of those 20%, very, 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 very few of them needed any form of rehabilitation, any form of therapy, because their situation had changed. Okay? Now, this isn't the full story, because your brains and your brain chemistry can change so entirely that just changing your situation isn't always going to help. And that's why, if we looked before about how can we help addictions, D and research is so important, because sometimes there may be a chemical change in the brain that needs to change, and so maybe that person needs chemical interventions, they need medicinal drugs to help them. But how can you help? From this story, I'd like you to write down in the chat, if you knew someone, or you felt like you were someone, what would you write to that person? And what I'd like you to do is start what you're writing with, it would be, to my friend. I don't want names, just to my friend, and then write a little something. What would you say or do for that person who you feel might be in a position that's quite dangerous? So I'd like you to see, what do you think, to my friend? What are you going to do to try and help them and support them? Ultimately, you're not there to tell them what to do or what not to do. Let's start. To my friend, what do you think? I'm going to go back to here. We can have a look. To my friend. And see if you can write something nice. In about 4 minutes, I'm going to be finishing up. So I'd love to hear what people say. Just a little letter. Maybe it's not aimed at anyone. Maybe it's aimed at someone in the world who you know might need support. What might you write to them to help them? Don't do drugs, dude. They are bad. Definitely. So it sounds like you're talking about educating them, maybe sort of giving them information about why what that person might be doing that's addictive might be negative for them. So that's a nice idea. You're using point E there in your little letter, you know. Educate. Any other ideas of what we can say to someone to help them? Sometimes people can be in positions where they didn't know this thing was addictive. So as 1 Million Soft have said, sort of, you know, letting them know actually what this is quite bad. It can be very addictive. Some people feel that their lives are so difficult that maybe they need these things to escape that life. Oftentimes people go into gaming because they feel like their everyday life is so difficult. They just want to escape into a screen. Bendable sugar. Dear to my friend, it's okay to talk to others about your problems and they will support you. I think that's absolutely a beautiful thing to say. Thank you very much, Bendable Sugar. Exactly, that's this idea of B and C, that there are people there to talk to and they're there to help you. You don't have to be alone when doing this. Sometimes that's all that can help, just having people around that are there to listen to you, to talk to you, and to support you in what you need. I like that a lot. So we've got this idea of education, we've got support. Any other ideas that people want to share in the next couple of minutes before I finish up? So I've received another letter to my friend. To my friend, I have an idea of how you feel. I'm here. I'll always be here. We can beat this thing. You're not bad. You're not weak. You just have a problem that you need to beat. I'm here for you. Everyone deserves someone there for them when they need it, but especially you. Mad love. I love that. That's really sweet. Very supportive. This idea that you can help that person and that they can get through it. Olivia 2008, to my friend, try to slowly come off them and don't worry about moving too quickly as that may harm you. Read about the drug and the effects so you can be educated. Every time you take them, make sure it's clean and safe and talk to others who are in the same situation. Olivia 2008, that's really beautiful what you've written. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, I think with the time that it is, I'm going to be finishing up there, unless anyone else would like to just quickly press enter and share what they've got so far as a final position here. But I think it's been really lovely to talk to you all about the psychology of addiction. Remember, addiction isn't just what we hear about of drugs, but it can be in a number of different facets. Things that give you pleasure, that may be considering obsessive and can negatively impact your life. It's worth watching out for things like that so you can help yourselves and help others. It's been a real pleasure to hang out with you guys. I hope you have a great day and a great rest of your week. I really look forward to some of the other things that are going on in Aim High. From next week, we're going to be starting the 2 weeks back to school Aim High sessions, which are going to be immensely exciting. Next week, I'm going to be doing bits on chemistry. So if anyone's interested in forensic chemistry, Tuesday next week, I'll be on there. Have a brilliant day. All the best. Mad love.